Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Healthy Relationships Initiative program on coping with loneliness during the holidays. My name is Christine Murray, and I'm the director for the Center for Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships at UNC Greensboro, where I also oversee the Healthy Relationships Initiative. Today's program is actually our final live program of the year for the Healthy Relationships Initiative, so we're glad that you're here and a part of today's program. The mission of the Healthy Relationships Initiative is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds. And we do that by offering a variety of programs and online resources, a lot of face-to-face events when we can, but obviously right now we're doing a lot in the virtual world. So we're glad that you're here with us. We hope that you'll check out our website at healthyrelationshipsinitiative.org or connect with us on social media at Healthy Relationships Initiative to learn more about our upcoming programs and events, especially as the new year is getting started. Today's program is somewhat of a special one because last month we actually did a 3-part series on healthy relationships during the holiday season, especially in the COVID context. And today's program is actually somewhat of a follow-up to one of those programs that we did around loneliness. And we had such a big response to that program because we know that a lot of people right now are facing loneliness, whether it's around the holidays, which can be a very happy, festive time of year, but it also can be a lonely and difficult time of year. But especially during COVID and with all the social distancing and isolation that people have been facing. So we decided, since it was such a needed topic, that we wanted to come back and do another program. And so we invited some of our favorite Healthy Relationships Initiative friends, I should say. I think all but one of you have been part of another program that we've done this year. And so we wanted to get a lot of different perspectives for people who are working in the mental health field, addictions field, and coaching. And so we're really excited to introduce this panel with you today. So what I'm gonna do is ask each of our panelists to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background and the work that you do. And so we'll just go in alphabetical order in the order that you're listed on the slide here that you can see. So go ahead, we'll start with you, Robin. Thanks for being here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Campbell. I currently serve as Director of Counseling at Salem College. I also am the founder and creator of Arise Innovative Solutions. We provide professional development for businesses in the areas of self-care, wellness, and mental health topics. We also provide coaching, individual and group coaching. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Robin. Bernard, you're probably not used to being second alphabetical order, but it looks like that's where you are in today's lineup. So thanks, Bernard, for being here. And if you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Bernard. I'm one of the counselors, primary men's counselors here at Fellowship Hall. We are a treatment center for substance use disorder. And so, I've been working here primarily in the primary program, but also a little bit in the family program as well. And just a little bit on my background working with couples and families. Went through the UNC Greensboro Master's in Counseling program there. And so actually worked with Dr. Murray there. She was my instructor and track leader. So it's cool to be working on a panel with you. Thanks for having me.
It's always great working with you as well, Bernard. So thanks for being here. Emily, you're up next.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Christine. My name is Emily Viverette. I am the Director of Faith, Health, Chaplaincy, and Education at Wake Forest Baptist Health. So my duties involve overseeing spiritual care for our system, as well as working with our training program of clergy and chaplains. So I'm really glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Emily. And Alicia, we'd love to hear from you next.
Hello, my name is Alicia Wilfert. I am the founder of Yoke in Abundance. I work majority with women, creatives, makers, entrepreneurs, and spiritual seekers. And we do a lot with leadership development and building our businesses through creativity and positive psychology.
Thank you, Alicia. And last but not least, and I will mention that you're actually part of a powerhouse husband-wife team here. And so you are Emily's husband, but you're also a great professional in your own right. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself too, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Michael Wildman, and I'm a therapist at Cromwell Counseling and a licensed clinical addiction specialist, and have about 20 years in behavioral health, mostly working with folks who are struggling with problems surrounding drug or alcohol use. And I'm very grateful to be a part of this very wise group of folks this afternoon.
All right, thank you all for introducing yourselves. If you're joining us live in our Zoom room, and I can see we've got some participants here in our Facebook Live meeting as well, we do invite you to share questions for our panelists. You can do that through the chat room in Zoom and through the comments in our Facebook Live event, and we'll be sure to share those. You can either share those for the whole group, or you can send either Camila Dos Santos, or you could send myself a private message if you have a question on Zoom. Your Facebook Live comments will not be private, but if you want to send a private message through the Zoom room, you're welcome to do so. So we're going to kick things off, starting with just looking at what is loneliness and how are people experiencing loneliness, especially right now, and how is it impacting people around the holidays during this unique time where we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So Alicia, I'm going to kick it off with you and ask you to talk a little bit about what does loneliness look like for adults especially, and then we'll talk about some different stages of life as well.
Christine, thank you. I think it's really interesting because it's not so much what we would necessarily think of as loneliness, but when you put all of the pieces together, that paints a bigger picture, and you can define all of those pieces when they come together as loneliness. So some things that loneliness looks like for adults is, you know, that lack of ability to connect more deeply with people. So often if we're having a lot of what it feels like surface level interactions, it doesn't feel like we can really share of ourselves or be vulnerable. That would be one piece of the puzzle. We have friends and family, but we're still engaging with them on that surface level as well. So you might think, yeah, I've got friends, I have family, I talk to people a lot, but are we going deeper with those conversations and discussions? You might feel like you have a lot of friends, but no best friend, no one who really gets you, no one that you can call when things aren't going well to help you talk about what's going on. Also, negative feelings of self-doubt and self-worth can start to trickle in. So that alone isn't loneliness, but when coupled with these other things, it can be a symptom of loneliness. And that exhausting burnout feeling when we're trying to engage, but nothing that's actually, we're engaging, but it's not filling up our cup. So none of those alone is necessarily loneliness, but when you put those all together, that can create loneliness for adults. So that's where I would start, but I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about what loneliness looks like for adults.
Sure. Does anyone else want to jump in before we move to looking at some different age groups? All right, well, let's go ahead then. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about that. But one thing that really stood out to me about what you just said, Alicia, I think you made so many good points, and especially that it's not just about being alone. And we talked about that a lot in the first program, that you can be surrounded with people, you can be doing things, and you can still have a feeling of loneliness, which I think is such an important starting place for this discussion. So Robin, you work with college students. So how do you see loneliness maybe look different or similarities with either younger adults or adolescents or even children?
Well, just like Emily said, that they're unable to connect with others at a deeper level. And when we think about college students, we know that college is a time of adjustment anyway, right? So when students are coming to campus for the first time or being away from home for the first time, that's an adjustment within itself. So it is a big issue for college students. They may feel like others don't really understand them. They may experience self-doubt and self-worth. And just losing the social contacts from high school. in their own hometown, and coming to this new environment, trying to connect, can create loneliness. And it may even present itself as sometimes like a low grade of depression, because they're isolating themselves from others, not really knowing how to connect. And we know that college is a vital part, connection is a vital part of college life, and that college students are social beings, right? So we have to think about that whole connection piece, like Emily stated earlier. But I know there has been some research done that indicates that young people that frequently use social media feel more isolated than those that do not, because social media, you're operating behind that screen and you're constantly kind of, typing in and being able to interact, but you still feel disconnected because it's not that human contact. So those are some ways that it can show up. And then you think about too, with loneliness, throw in the pandemic. And so that creates a whole nother layer of things that students have to deal with. And think about students that are virtual, like my Salem students are virtual right now. So that has been something that has come up in some of our sessions about that loneliness piece. And it may even be manifested more if they're in an environment that is not as healthy with their parents.
And so, Mike, I'm going to turn this next question to you first. And so how do you see loneliness as impacting people's lives? And especially, as Robin mentioned, right now, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think loneliness just adds an extra layer of stress to things. I think when you start thinking, I've got to do all of this on my own, I don't have the extra support, I don't have just an extra smiling face or somebody else to connect with about this. I think it just adds an extra layer of stress to things. And the pandemic itself is just this background noise of anxiety in our lives that gets a little louder or a little softer at times, but is just there all the time, and it has been for months and months now. So if I think about adding stress upon stress, it's it's a lot for everybody to carry right now. And I think we are social creatures. We are meant to interact with each other, and so anything that disconnects that, I think, is obviously just hurts sort of our normal way of being in the world.
I think those are really good points about how we're naturally social, and those connections are so important. And Alicia, coming back to you, do you have other thoughts about how loneliness impacts our lives? And, especially maybe I'm wondering if you have thoughts around, like, there's this kind of a stigma around admitting you're lonely, right? So how do you see that play out?
I think especially right now, it's extra interesting because, we've got so many extrovert friends out there and introvert friends. And even the introverts like myself, I'm definitely an introvert myself. And even I've reached my limit of introvertedness. And so it's strange to even come out and say, yeah, I actually need more people time, right? So those of us who aren't used to those roles of telling people that are important to us that we actually need more of them, or we need to find ways to connect in a deeper level, can be difficult. But I think it is important right now that we that when we start to feel that we acknowledge it, and then we make the concerted effort to reach out to someone and tell them what it is that we need. Like, do we need to go for a socially distanced walk? Do we need to connect via Zoom? And really think about it from a who is going to fill up your cup perspective.
That's a great thought. I hadn't really thought about that, but in terms of really being intentional about spending time, you have limited opportunities for in-person gathering. And so we really need to think about who's going to be the people that are going to fill our cup. And, a lot of times I think that for many people have seen during this extended many months of the pandemic, maybe some of those relationships that maybe weren't as significant have started to fall off a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of we're talking a lot about relationships. And so Bernard, your training is in family counseling and you do a lot of work with families at Fellowship Hall. So what are you seeing in terms of how loneliness is impacting people's relationships and families?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so going back to this kind of being like a human need, right? This idea that as humans we have a desire and a need that you know, to connect with other people, and so loneliness can sort of be, yeah, that need not really being met. And so some of the ways that you know, that loneliness can impact our relationships, definitely, you know, if we're talking about romantic or friendships or family or whatever it may be, you know, finding other ways to get those needs met outside of those individual relationships. And so at times, yeah, kind of like what you're getting at here with those relationships falling off. I mean, there might just be sort of a natural death to some of those relationships, or you know, just a general change in them as you might withdraw more from them. There's definitely potential for like heightened sensitivity in relationships, feeling a sort of sense of rejection or isolation. And you know, I also think it's important to mention that it could potentially be triggering for, like, if somebody has trauma related to you know, attachment style really, but being, you know, sort of abandoned, or any sort of disconnect or anything that could trigger feelings of loneliness. Those issues in the relationship could be a trigger for that trauma, which I think is important to acknowledge, you know. And then sort of on the other side of things, I would also add that it's an opportunity. Really, it's an opportunity to, you know, take initiative and sort of have the autonomy to be able to state your needs and sort of establish new boundaries in the relationship, kind of a reframe to keep it in a positive light, that, yeah, you know, it's an opportunity to look at what could change, and you know, what could really bring you, and whether it's your romantic partner, family member, friend, or whoever, closer together.
I'm so glad you mentioned that sort of positive, the opportunities that are happening now, because of course we all have a tendency to think about all the negatives and the challenges, of which there are many, but there can be some good things that come out of that. I think you really can see who's really on your side, who are the people that you really enjoy spending time with, how do you make those relationships even stronger and healthier. So I'm glad that you brought that piece up, because I think it does sometimes get lost. Emily, kind of turning to you now, I'd love for you to speak a bit about some of the feelings that can accompany loneliness. And I would really be interested in your perspective on this, especially as a chaplain in a hospital setting, and just having seen today a notice about changes to like visitor policies to hospitals, and, you know, just thinking how pertinent this is right now when we're looking at some of these unique situations that are coming up around COVID, especially.
Yeah, Christine, thank you. Certainly one of the, I couldn't speak of this without speaking about the connection between grief and loneliness. So I feel like our country as a whole is holding a lot of grief, and grief in and of itself is multiple feelings, but also can be experienced as very isolating and lonely. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, particularly around the holidays, which we'll get to a little later. But this notion of loneliness and grief. In the hospital setting, there was a time when visitors weren't really allowed, and that was very hard for our patients and very hard for our staff, because when people are lonely, they need connection and they're reaching out. And so our chaplains would spend a lot of time talking with folks who were feeling very alone, isolated, sad, worried, anxious. So loneliness can actually, while it's something to be overcome in some ways, it's also something to listen to and pay attention to. So how do you sit with, listen to loneliness, and get a sense of what you really need? I loved what Alicia said, you know, because I may be lonely, but being lonely doesn't necessarily mean one thing. It can mean lots of different things. And we have to be patient with ourselves and learn to sit in that discomfort for long enough to figure out what it is we really need. I'm reading this great book right now. I don't know if y'all found it. It's Vivek Murthy's Together. And he's the former Surgeon General, and he's going to be the next Surgeon General. And he talks about 3 different kinds of loneliness, which is intimate loneliness, relational loneliness, and collective loneliness, which I thought was fascinating. And so the intimate is like the one-on-one partner couple relationship. And then there's the relational loneliness, which is like the deep friend being heard and being seen, Alicia, like you were saying. And then the collective loneliness of, being a part of a larger group that gives you meaning and purpose. So you're a part of something bigger than yourself. So those are a few of my thoughts. Thank you.
Sounds like a really great reference. Thanks for sharing that book. And everybody else, feel free to share if you have any others as well. Does anybody, before we move on, we're going to dive into talking a little bit more about loneliness around the holidays, but does anybody have any other big picture thoughts on sort of defining and understanding loneliness before we move to that? All right, hearing that. Oh, go ahead, Bernard. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand in the chat, but I did just want to say, and I think that it's kind of been touched on here a little bit, but just recognizing that it can just be like a feeling that we experience and that we share and kind of process, and it passes, that we can honor and acknowledge, but it doesn't necessarily have to result in like a maladaptive coping strategy or isolation or something that's going to really impact us in a super negative way. It can be something that, as we learn how to deal with it, recognize it, honor it, it just can become another feeling that we practice mindfulness with. That was all.
That's a great reminder too. And we did talk a lot about that in the first program, especially around how just learning to sort of accept that it's just a natural human feeling. We all feel lonely from time to time. And I think that because there is such a stigma around saying I'm lonely, we feel like maybe that means nobody wants to be our friend or nobody wants to be with us, but just recognizing that it's universal. Alicia, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I mean, I think that, like Bernard said, there can be so much opportunity in loneliness to get to know ourselves and to start to get to know what our needs are. And when we can get to know ourselves in that way and really get curious about what the loneliness is and where it's coming from, that creates an opportunity for us to know ourselves better, but also to learn how to ask for what we need. And I just think that that's an important piece, because we do have the ability to ask for what it is that we need from ourselves, from our environment, and from the people around us as well.
That's great. And that seems like something that can really start with a lot of self-reflection of like, what is this loneliness telling me? Like, what is it revealing that I feel like I'm maybe missing in my life, or a lack of connection? And then what can I do about it? So I think that that's a great point. Robin, I see you took yourself off of mute. Do you have anything else you want to add now?
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about the holidays. This is sort of part of our continuation of our Healthy Relationships Initiative holidays series. And we are right in the thick of holiday season right now. And I think even in a normal year, loneliness is a lot more common than we think it is around the holidays. It becomes really pronounced for people around the holidays. And I think that that's especially true during this year with COVID. So let's talk first about just generally around the holidays. And Emily, starting with you, why do you think loneliness just becomes so much more intense around the holidays?
Well, there are lots of different reasons, but one, I was on a webinar earlier today about holiday grief. And, one of the pieces is that holidays are just full of unrealistic expectations anyway. We have this kind of curated social media system where everybody shows how pretty their houses look and how wonderful everything looks. And so there's just an unnatural way we present ourselves. And so people whose lives don't look like that in real life, which, face it, nobody's real life looks like that, feel somehow less than, or this sense of like self-worth feels damaged. So the unnatural expectations around holidays are really painful. And also, just, the older you get, the more losses you have over the course of your life typically. And so they're just people who used to be in your holiday experiences that aren't there anymore. So there is that grief that accompanies a holiday where, like my dad's no longer alive. So every holiday season, there's a sense of his presence is missing. And so that's going to be even more pronounced this year as we think about over 300,000 deaths in our country. The holidays look drastically different, and there will be lots of loneliness as a result of that.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a time when feelings of grief and just, grief can really rise to the surface. And that could be grieving a loss of a loved one. It could be grieving an unmet expectation about holidays, grieving the loss of a relationship or a broken relationship potentially. And so, Robin, what do you think how is the pandemic sort of exacerbating all of this during the holidays right now?
Well, we know that holidays is that sense of community when we get a chance to connect with family members that we don't get a chance to see all year long. And the pandemic has complicated that. And it's interesting too that, Emily was mentioning about that grief. And that's what I was going to talk a little bit about, is that we are grieving the loss of normalcy in so many different ways, from grieving monumentous things that would have happened this year, whether it was graduation or a wedding or family reunion or birthday parties and things like that. So when you think about the different areas of grief and the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, the acceptance, if you think about everything that has happened in 2020, we're going through those different areas of grief, and we're vacillating between those areas. So you put that on top of the pandemic, and you think about too, just the uncertainty that still comes, even though the vaccine has been distributed and things are starting to kind of move in a positive way, there still is a lot of uncertainty during this time for the holiday. So those are some things that we need to think about. And something else too is just really think about giving ourselves some grace during this time. It's been difficult for everyone. So we really need to think about how that is impacting our family relationships. So trying to still connect instead of a text message, maybe an actual Zoom or an actual FaceTime, just to get that engagement. So I think that's really, really important right now during the holidays.
You bring up some really good points about all the things that people may have been missing. When we started January 1st, 2020, like these are all the things that I'm looking forward to this year. And it probably is really hitting people very hard right now in terms of, wow, this year did not go how I expected. And especially maybe I haven't been able to see my family for a really long time, as you mentioned, around those relationship pieces. And so that is one piece that I think is really contributing to a lot of the greater loneliness right now, is that maybe family members that you would have been able to visit normally, or you have a tradition to visit them every year, and now you can't do that. And so, Alicia, my next question's for you. When people are living far apart from their families, can't see them, or loved ones, friends, what are some suggestions for if you live far away from your family or friends you always see over the holidays and you just can't this year because of COVID? What thoughts do you have?
Purposeful Zoom meetings. Purposeful being the operative word here, right? Like, how many times have we gotten on a Zoom meeting with our families and it devolves into political drama or complaining, right? But if you come together over a purpose and an intention, it can really be a game changer for creating those connections that are not just surface level, or the things, instead of having things that make us feel disconnected, things that make us feel connected. So one of the things that's happening in the Yoke and Abundance community that can really translate to our families is this. On Friday, we're doing what we call Sacred Maker Happy Hour. And so we are coming together, and everyone has been told what supplies they need to get. And we are stringing cranberries for our Christmas trees, and we're making little oranges with cloves stuck in them, and just doing whatever Christmas or holiday crafts that you want to in a way to, and we're going to hang out, and we're going to have some curated questions that folks can answer for us to get to know one another better. So that if someone in your family is willing to take the lead and create an evening with a theme and intention and some really pointed questions to help keep you on topic that will help you connect, that can be so powerful and not leave you feeling empty at the end of the Zoom meeting.
I love that creative idea because I do think we all want to be connected. And then sometimes you get in these kind of virtual chats and it's like, okay, what are we going to talk about? Or it feels weird, because you're not like in a room, there's no side conversations, everybody's sort of talking. And so, whereas it might feel kind of, I don't know, cheesy or tacky in a normal year as a family to say, hey, family, like, let's do this, activity together. This is a great opportunity to do some things that can be real opportunities for discussion that might push people a little bit out of their comfort zone, but it's out of your comfort zone to be sitting kind of awkwardly, not knowing what to say as well, right?
And one last thing that I'd like to add to that, it's like intentionally, we might not be able to create all of the traditions that we normally create. And some of those traditions might not have been that great anyway. We're just doing them because they were traditions. So this year gives us an opportunity to really think about what traditions can we do, and can we get creative about bringing our family and friends into those traditions, either virtually or from a responsibly socially distanced way, which I think can help us create maybe a new tradition that's also exciting.
I think that's a great point. Does anybody else, do any of the rest of you have any sort of creative suggestions for connecting with family from afar?
I don't have a creative suggestion, but I did want to just back up to something that Alicia said and that Robin said as well, and kind of preparing for the holiday is giving ourselves grace. And that sense at first, just level setting and saying, you know what, this is not going to be the holiday we wanted it to be. I mean, there's a part of just kind of saying that out loud and saying that out loud with the family. And then from moving from that place, being able to say, okay, so what can we do? We can't do it the way it's always been done. So let's just name it, and it's going to feel different. But I think that also creates some kind of creative freedom to do something different too. And maybe that's obvious, but I felt like saying it out loud. So.
All right. Well, those are great. I'm sure we'll talk more around the holiday theme as moving forward, but we do have two addiction specialist counselors in our midst here, so we don't want to waste the opportunity. We did a program, actually both Bernard and Mike were a part of it, right? Earlier this year about how to know when substance use becomes substance abuse. I don't think that's the exact title, but Camilla is on her chat room game, so I'm sure she will post the link to this. But we have definitely seen a trend in increasing use of substances during the pandemic. And the holidays, again, all the challenges around the holidays, even in a normal year, often can be a time of heightened substance use and or abuse. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about loneliness and addiction. But first of all, kind of talking more about people who are in recovery. And I think learning to manage loneliness as part of the recovery process is a very common part of that process. So Bernard, starting with you, do people who are in recovery or people who are living with addiction experience loneliness differently? And how might loneliness manifest in maybe unique ways for those who have faced addiction in their lives?
Yeah. So to sort of answer the first question, looking at, do people in recovery or people who live with addiction experience loneliness differently? I would say in some ways, yes, because the stakes are really high. So if you're recovering from an addiction and you knew in the past, okay, this substance relieves my sense of loneliness. Not only does it relieve it, but it disconnects me from all emotions. It numbs me out. It becomes the solution to any discomfort at all. In moments of in moments of loneliness, that thought might have the tendency to come up. Wow, okay, I could return to using alcohol or cannabis or heroin to escape this feeling of loneliness. And so, yeah, I mean, the stakes are really high when it comes to that, because obviously these individuals who are, in recovery don't want to return to that use. And so there's a sense of urgency to get into the solution and find ways to deal with that loneliness before returning to, picking up a substance in order to fix that. And as far as it manifesting for those dealing with addiction, there are a few things to consider here. I think one of them is that when addicts and alcoholics or individuals dealing with substance use disorder are using, oftentimes they're going to find themselves isolating from other people, especially as the disease progresses, and so find themselves disconnecting from family members and friends in order to protect the addiction, if you will, in order to find ways that to ignore the reality of the situation, sort of stay in denial about it, and to be able to use. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a conscious decision. I think it's part of the powerlessness of addiction, but very much real as to what's going on in those moments. And so you're using alone, separating yourself from other people. And then on top of that, there's sort of this stigma around addiction that, it's a choice. And so that can also contribute to those feelings of loneliness and thinking, okay, I'm alone, I'm using alone, I'm isolating from others. And on top of that, there's this added layer of, and I can't really ask for help because I'll be judged for it. And so, yeah, it sort of compounds that loneliness. So I think there are definitely some unique challenges that people, in recovery and in addiction sort of face when talking about loneliness.
And Mike, what about you? What are some of the things that you've seen in terms of how loneliness can impact people's experiences with addiction or recovery?
Right. I think somebody I was working with the other day said, this is just so hard to do on my own. It's so hard to do alone. I think as Bernard said, this is when folks are, in problem use, that, they are disconnected and alone and pushed away. And so a lot of people make use of great supportive communities to move into recovery. And that's changed so much over the last several months. And so loneliness, it's, as we said, it's that extra layer of stress on things. It's an extra emotion to navigate and to work with. And I think when people are lonely, I think they start asking the why question: why me? Why me? And that sort of pushes us into, there's something wrong with me. And I think we've sort of gotten so close to this, but I think we haven't called it shame. But I think especially for folks who are in recovery or working towards any stage of recovery from alcohol or other substance use, is that shame is a big piece of that. And so I think feeling that loneliness and thinking there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough to connect with these other people. There's who would want to be with someone like me and what's been going on with me. So I think it is easy to sort of slide down into that shame pit. And when those other emotions are kind of, we're getting those waves of that loneliness and that big feeling. So I think it is something that's an extra struggle. It's an extra thing to overcome and to work with.
What about, I'm going to add sort of a different question that's not on our list of predetermined questions, but for Bernard or Mike or others, for somebody who might be a loved one, their loved one is facing with an addiction and loneliness. And, that person themselves can be feeling some loneliness. And do you have any thoughts on what somebody can do when a loved one is facing addiction and it's contributing to their own feelings of loneliness, and maybe how to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, just something that comes to mind right away. It's sort of the counterpart to individuals who are in recovery and experiencing those things, but kind of like Mike mentioned about like having the supports for addicts and alcoholics or people who are using substances or struggling with that. Being able to reach out to their own communities, Nar-Anon and Al-Anon, and accessing some of those things and finding ways to deal with the, powerlessness over their, loved one who might be experiencing this, addiction or alcoholism, finding ways to, get it, find acceptance and sort of a healthy sense of detachment from the outcome of what might happen with, their loved one who might be struggling with those things.
Thanks, Bernard, for your thoughts on that. And then I guess one more topic to cover before we move on to a different subject from this addiction piece is, what do you see as some warning signs that feelings of loneliness might be getting in the way of someone's recovery journey?
Yeah, I would just add here, withdraw from those communities. So if somebody's, in recovery and they find themselves in, Celebrate Recovery or Drug Addicts Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever it might be, if individuals have been going to meetings and really, being really involved, chairing meetings, all those sorts of things, and then all of a sudden there's a drop off in their involvement, there, that could be a pretty big red flag that there's something going on, and it could, be loneliness, could be a part of that. I would say also when talking about addiction and substance use, reconnecting with old friends. And so if there are people that they used to use with that, really were part of them coping with their loneliness, just might have been in a sort of maladaptive sense, that could be another warning sign that, okay, yeah, this person's feeling lonely, and even maybe they're headed towards a relapse or return to use. Just some thoughts there.
Thanks. Mike, do you have any other final points you'd like to add on the loneliness and addiction connections before we move on?
Yeah, I think that folks just people want to be seen, and people want to be known, and people want to be heard, and people want to connect in from whatever place they're coming from, and however they can do that is such a powerful thing. Whether that's someone who's thinking that I'm the only one who has this problem, and finds out that there's millions of other people that have this problem, or they're a family member that's thinking I'm alone and I didn't think anybody else had this going on, and they find millions of other people out there who have that. So that just being seen and known and heard is such a powerful thing.
Yeah, those are great points, especially just about understanding how common the loneliness feelings are, and how many, especially if you also have addiction on top of that, or other mental health issues on top of that, just understanding that there doesn't need to be the shame and the stigma surrounding that, and that it's okay to admit when you need help and support. And so we're going to move to talking about kind of working through feelings of loneliness and overcoming loneliness. And I'll just kind of remind everybody, especially if you maybe joined us a little bit later in the program, that we did talk earlier about how loneliness is a universal feeling. It's a natural human emotion. And so we want to acknowledge feelings of loneliness and potentially even learn to sit with them as part of our, journey and growing and maturing in life. But at the same time, we also want to think about how do we work through those feelings of loneliness, and how do we use those to help us make some positive changes in our lives. So as kind of an introduction to this, I would like to ask Alicia if you could speak to why does overcoming loneliness matter?
I mean, we've touched on it so much, and from a positive psychology standpoint, Chris Peterson summed up positive psychology by saying other people matter. How we relate to one another, that collective unconscious, anything that's going on in the world within our community is having an impact, and that impacts us. So if we can, and anything that's happening with us on the reverse is impacting other people. So loneliness, from a standpoint of us addressing it within ourselves, it is collective care when we do that. If we are addressing it within ourselves and taking care of ourselves, we're better able to function in society and be there for our families. And likewise, right, when we can see that others are facing loneliness, and we do things like reach out, call that neighbor around the block who might have lost her father or a parent, and say, hey, can you go for a walk this week? Proactively reaching out, it makes everyone stronger. Loneliness just affects us in so many ways, and but other people matter. We matter to each other. So loneliness, yeah, that sums that up, I would say.
No, those are great points. And I think I'd actually like to ask this next question of each of you, maybe starting with you, Alicia, and then ask everybody to share. What's an idea or some ideas about what people can do when they're feeling lonely? How can they work through those feelings and hopefully feel ultimately less loneliness? So Alicia, we'll start with you, and then everybody else just feel free to sort of jump in.
I think so often those of us that when we experience loneliness, it's not that other people aren't around. It really is more those shallow relationships. And sometimes if we can just take a little bit of initiative to be vulnerable and to share what's going on, it can create a connection. And that deeper connection beyond surface level is really what's going to help be that antidote, so to speak, to the loneliness. And I think something that helps significantly with that is being able to be united around something that you enjoy, right? Which is why our faith communities are often so important to us. And I don't subscribe to a certain faith. So for me, I have a group that we celebrate creativity and we create together via Zoom and then have space to talk to one another. So I created a community that I needed for myself. And, not everyone wants to create their own community, but it can be easier than you think to find a community where you feel safe enough to talk about what's going on in your life. So find a community that can be there for you and support you.
I would say take a look within and again, be intentional. Think about something that you have been putting off for quite some time. I know during this pandemic time, it's given us time to kind of rethink a lot of things. So maybe even getting involved in taking a class. There have been a lot of free classes and things that you can do online, or something that brings you passion or joy. If you've always liked writing and you thought about starting a blog, now is the time to kind of look within and see how you can connect with those things that bring you joy, that bring you passion, that kind of takes your mind off of the loneliness and the isolation.
I can talk about a time in my life when I discovered I was lonely and didn't really know it. So a few years ago, my kids were a little bit older. Mike and I think I can say we were happily married. You can nod. Yeah. So anyway, a good career, we were involved in church, but I was just kind of dissatisfied in some way. So I was going to counseling, and I got to realize that what I was missing was this kind of relational, like I have lots of girlfriends and some that I've had for a really long time, but we would see each other once a year and we'd have these really deep, and I was really longing for that. So what I did is I reached out to one of them, and we call each other now every 2 weeks. It doesn't always work out exactly every 2 weeks, but we're there. And so we have this in-depth kind of I'm an introvert. I don't need a lot of depth like that, but it was really helpful. So that's been really healing for me over the years to have this person that I regularly have an in-depth conversation with and can feel seen and heard.
I think loneliness keeps us inside like this bubble. So I think you have to do something to break that bubble. I think one of the things, we're so lucky here in Greensboro and even in the Triad to have these great parks, whether it's our city or parks or whether it's our state parks, to get out and to get into nature. I think if you want to be connected, feel that there's something greater than yourself out there, that you want to feel that there is something more. I think you look around the natural. I mean, even if you can't find somebody else to do this with, you can at least feel that there's something more than you by looking at the natural world and putting yourself in a situation where you can enjoy some of the awe of nature. And I think that's a way to even if you can't connect with another person, to connect with something greater.
Those are all great suggestions. Bernard, do you have anything else that you would like to contribute?
No, I would just say, taking advantage of whatever resources you have around you, and whether it is, being outdoors and engaging with nature in some way, or even using some of like the online platforms for like there's like online platforms for obviously like internet gaming, but then there's also like board games and stuff like that that you can play online with family members, and just kind of a way to connect and overcome some of that. And so just finding I like the word that I've heard a few times today, that being very intentional and sort of deciding on, this is something that we can do together, and whether that's creating or working towards a common goal, or something where you can very, very much be intentional and sort of bond over whatever it might be.
I think any number of those, I think that the more strategies that a person might resonate with and that they can put in place, the more they're going to be taking steps to work through that. And just also, we talked a lot about this in the first program too, but just to kind of keep going back to that word that I heard earlier around level setting, like you're not going to go from feelings most likely of extreme loneliness to immediately feeling really connected, and just recognizing that it's a process, and that you can take all these steps, but it takes a lot of time to build closer relationships with people. It takes a lot of time to build those connections, but looking for those opportunities is a really valuable piece. And, those are all things that we as adults can really do, but I think that there are some interesting challenges when we're thinking about parenting children, teenagers. Right now, I know I'm a parent. For those who don't know, I've got an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I know these are times when our kids are really cut off too. So I'm curious, I'll start with you, Robin, maybe especially from your perspective as a college counselor, but and then maybe, kind of open it up. And especially, I happen to know that Emily and Mike are parents of children too, a teenager, because they're friends with my children. But I'd love to hear like even a parenting perspective as well about just, as a parent, how do you help support your child through those feelings of loneliness? So Robin, we'll start with you.
Okay, and being intentional, that seems to keep coming up, but making an effort to connect with your children and your family, and actually setting up family activities. So now during this time of us being limited to going out, families are able to have dinner together now. Maybe making an activity with the kids of preparing a meal together. So actually being intentional about an activity, whether it be dinner or a movie night, something as simple as someone mentioned about just getting out and having a family walk at the park or in the neighborhood. So I think right now with families and children, really taking this opportunity to set up time to do things together. Because before the virus, people were just so busy and all over the place. It's helped us to kind of focus in more on our family within our homes.
Those are great points. And especially sometimes as a family, you need to get creative, because I know that's one thing that I've really felt is like a lot of the things that normally we do together, with my kids, it's like, we can't do them right now. We can't go to these normal places. So what can we do instead to have that connection? I'm curious, Emily, Mike, do either of you want to add something about kind of from you as a parent, maybe how you think about this?
I wish we had answers. I think, we're still struggling in how to figure this out ourselves. Our children are both very different. One is very extroverted and one is very introverted. And so the extroverted one, we've moved to a neighborhood that has kids around. And so that kid is outside playing, socially distant, but, really, and that kid takes initiative online to connect with friends. And then we have another kid who's super introverted. And when people reach out to that one, they'll respond maybe within 24 hours if you're lucky. So we're just trying to figure that out. But it is a concern. We are doing things like family walks with the dog and dinners together and Jackbox games. That's like the new fun thing that our kids enjoy doing with us. That's cool enough for them to have fun with us doing, I think. But Mike, I don't know what else you would add.
Yeah, the struggle is real. I think you just have to try something. I think for me, I'm used to, going through my things around the house, but I'm like, I've got to pull one of the kids in this, so I'm like, it's Saturday, time to clean the gutters. Guess what? I'm not cleaning the gutters alone. I'll get the back gutters, and I'm pulling one of the kids. I'm like, fine, he's away from his screen for 20 minutes. Praise the Lord. So I mean, hey, we're raking the leaves, I'm raking the leaves, we're raking the leaves, we're all doing this together. So I think it's just been little simple things like, I change your, getting the kids to get involved with whatever you're doing, any kind of little thing, so that we're doing it together. And maybe that's a chance to have a conversation. Maybe that's a chance to get them away from the screens. Maybe that's a chance to just to notice something else that's going on, and to connect.
Alicia, do you have something you want to add?
I do. So I don't have children, but in my pod, there are 2 kids. And one thing that I've started playing with them when I get to have dinner with them is to tell me a bloom, a bud, and a thorn from their day. And so they've started now, even when I'm not there, they play that every night. And it's a real great way to get to know what they're looking forward to and what they're excited about. So it's really easy, just like what's a thorn in your life right now? I try to start with the thorn. What's something not going great? What are you excited about, and what are you happy that happened from today? And that can be a great way to connect as well.
Yeah, that's a great discussion opener there too. What about Robin, Bernard? Do you have anything else you would want to add about the parenting implications of loneliness?
Yeah, I would just say, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, being educated on, the different platforms and types of, social media, and just types of, what do you call them? Like, not educational, but just entertainment that they're listening to and watching, and being able to sort of figure out ways to relate with them. But yeah, I don't have kids either, so I'll stop there.
I was going to say, like Bernard, just really getting on their level. I have a niece that sometimes she'll come over here to do her virtual school. So getting on their level and seeing how you can connect in that way. And the whole game thing is what Bernard mentioned is the way that we've connected.
I think those are all great suggestions. And I especially really resonated with what Emily, you were saying earlier about that every child is different and has different needs and different kind of social outlets. And with my children, one of them is very much an initiator and very social. And then the other, I've had to kind of set things up for him, so that there's things that are in place for him to have opportunities to connect socially, because he's not necessarily going to initiate them. But I think, the more that we're doing and just paying attention and asking kids, even young kids, can often verbalize the feelings of loneliness, or, some level of expressing that they're experiencing that or feeling disconnected from friends. They might not say, I'm lonely. They might say, I miss my friends, or I miss seeing my teachers, or, whoever else they might be missing. So it's just kind of looking at how your child is experiencing loneliness, trying to help them make some connections. And I love the ideas too around just sort of small but meaningful ways of connecting. So I haven't asked either of my children to help do something like get the leaves out of the gutter, but I think that's a brilliant idea, because we can get some chores done and some connection time, but just looking for little things to do, and again, kind of setting reasonable expectations too, that it's not going to be the same level of social interaction as we have during non-COVID times, but that there are some meaningful ways to connect as well. So I think that those are all really great suggestions, and we can support each other and help our children, kind of think this through and help think what might be helpful for them. Another piece that I think is helpful really for many ages, but probably especially adolescents up to adults, is drawing upon your spirituality or your faith perspective. And so, Robin, starting with you, how do you think cultivating a spiritual life can help to work through feelings of loneliness?
If you have a spiritual practice, the faith component comes into play, which I think is very important. And because of everything that has gone on, you can find a faith practice that works for you. So even if that means connecting online, I know a lot of churches and worship centers have online things that you can do right now. And then just cultivating gratitude. During this time, we may have been looking at the glass half full, half empty versus half full. So really just taking time to just practicing a gratitude, writing a gratitude per day. Me and a couple of my friends, when the pandemic first started, we had a little support text group going on. So we would list 3 things that we were grateful for like those first 3 or 4 weeks when the pandemic started. And it was really refreshing. And something for me that I've just been practicing is the serenity prayer. That has been my staple during this time because when you think about it, accepting the things that you cannot change and the courage to know the difference. So I think a lot of it comes when we just really surrender and say, okay, what is it that I can control? And what is it that I can't control? And how can I find a space to be okay with that? So that's what I would say is, just tapping into that entity that's bigger than yourself to help you get through this.
And Emily, I'm sure as a chaplain, you've got some thoughts on this piece too, in terms of how do you see people's spiritual lives being a good resource for them as they're addressing their loneliness experiences?
I really do. So for me, I'm biased in believing that all human beings are spiritual in some way, shape, or form, that there's spirituality is about connection and belonging and purpose. And so if you're not a member of a particular faith tradition or a theistic religion where, people believe in God or Allah, there are also ways to connect with what are the things that give you purpose and make you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. So Mike was mentioning kind of walking in nature. Some people find a great deep sense of spirituality being out in creation and a sense of belonging. There's something about spirituality that allows for gives us perspective. There's a lot of perspective taking in nurturing your sense of spirituality. What is bigger than me to which I can commit my life? People struggling, with illness, as I see them in the hospital, it does become a place where people feel like they are held and they are not alone. So nurturing one sense of spirituality in some way nurtures a sense of connection with something that gives purpose and meaning, no matter what that is, whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's being a creative person and committing to creativity. And that can help people feel less alone. Tangibly, we've already mentioned connectedness to spiritual community. So if you're a member of a church, there's tangible people you can connect with. And that's one way, and purposeful action. But there might be other ways that nurtures if you're a giver in this world and you're not necessarily religious, service organizations are ways to go and help other people. That's a deeply spiritual practice. And Mike, feel free to jump in, or anyone else jump in too into what this means. But I do see spirituality and nurturing that as vital for folks dealing with illness, for folks dealing with loneliness. Our greatest contemplatives in the world nurtured solitude. And there's a difference between solitude and loneliness, and finding ways to be at home with oneself. Learning to be comfortable in the discomfort of feelings of loneliness, so that you can really learn from those parts of yourself. Meditation practices and prayer practice. Meditation and mindfulness does not have to come from a specific spiritual tradition, but can be incredibly helpful in building insight and connection to something bigger than yourself.
Would anyone else like to speak to the importance of spirituality here?
Yeah, I think folks who have made a journey of recovery, if they've made big changes with their drug or alcohol use or anything like that, I think there's a lot of things that are, there's a big shift in, out of meaninglessness into meaning. There is an experience of a major loss. And I think those are all really ripe times for spirituality, where people can connect and grow spiritually from these. And which sounds a lot like what's going on here. We're in a time of meaninglessness. We're in a time of grief. We're in a time of loss. It's a chance to nurture our spirituality and to nurture that and to put effort and time into there to find meaning in the loss, to find a new meaning to replace something that we had spent too much time doing before. I know personally part of my wellness in these past 9 months is to be a part of a meditation group. And I'm connected with people, and I'm also connected with that spiritual practice for me. And that's just been part of my self-care, and it's been an amazing journey that I've been doing since March. So I think this is the time. If you've had a little spiritual tug or noticed something like that, is a chance to feed that.
And I like to say just one thing, just to piggyback off of what Mike is saying, is the whole self-care. Self-care is so important now, and it is a spiritual practice to practice self-care when you think about the different components of self-care.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned I don't have a particular faith community, but I think of God as the great creator, and to me, creativity is everything. And whether it be we are writing or meditating, all of that's creativity, or if we are painting, or if we, creativity comes in so many forms. It does not need to look like traditional art, but oftentimes when we are expressing ourselves in a creative way, you're a channel, and it's almost impossible to feel lonely when you are channeling that creativity that's coming through you. So if you can find an outlet, a creative outlet of some sorts, and let yourself kind of get immersed in that experience, it can significantly help with creativity. But I really love what Emily said, that that all human beings are spiritual. I think that's so true.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, thinking about, sort of these principles like honesty or selflessness, charity or faith, humility, things like that. A lot of times, speaking with people in recovery, kind of having conversations about when you apply these spiritual concepts or spiritual principles, how does this affect the part of you that's intangible, the part of you that you can't necessarily touch. Just being able to look at that and say, okay, you know what, when I reach out and I ask other people for help, I feel a sense of connection to others, or whatever it might be, but just getting at, what it is, and how it affects you, and just, following the spiritual principle and sort of applying that to fight off loneliness in some way.
And I was just going to add the importance of ritual. And so, I mean, that's a habit. Ritual is kind of the religious word for habit, but the ways in which ritual in spiritual practice allow you to feel less alone, because this is something that's done regularly, that people for hundreds of years have done. So it's a part of this perspective, like you're joining with a collective group of people. And to experience something that feels comforting, and that can be very helpful for those who are lonely. So.
I really love all the insights that all of you shared on this subject, because I think that one thing we've talked about loneliness as sort of a feeling or an emotion, but it's also can be a real deeply existential crisis for people. And so I think it's really helpful for us to consider all those different, possible insights that we can get from spirituality, in ways that cultivating that part of our lives can really help us work through when we have periods of loneliness in our life. So our last sort of big picture topic that we're going to talk about, and I will note too, if anybody who's here with us in our audience in the Zoom room or in the Facebook Live, if you have any questions before we'll be wrapping up, we'll leave a little time for that. So please do put any questions you might have in the comments on Facebook Live or the chat in Zoom, so that we can take a look at those and pass those along to our panelists. But I do want to talk about how to get help, when to get help. Loneliness, as we've discussed, can be universal. We all have periods of loneliness. It's a normal part of life. And at the same time, sometimes it can lead to even deeper struggles or more significant maybe challenges related to our emotional or mental health. So first of all, just kind of thinking, when should people reach out? How do I know the difference between this is just a normal kind of universal feeling versus, wow, this is really something where I should get some help. So maybe Alicia, we'll start with you, and then Robin, if you have other thoughts you want to jump in after Alicia shares.
I'm just gonna say I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer this particular question. I'm gonna lob this one back at the group.
Say to start us off, when loneliness becomes debilitating, when it is affecting your everyday functioning, that's a red flag and a concern. And you want to think about what resources are available. I don't know if you want me to get into that, Christine. In the area, you think about if you are employed, thinking about your employee assistance program, which gives you free sessions, to just to call someone and let them know that how you're feeling, and really staying connected. Again, we get back to that connectedness. Make sure we're connected with those that love and care for us, and being able to have the conversation that, hey, I'm a little concerned now because this loneliness seems like it's going totally left, and sharing that with a family member or friend. But when it becomes debilitating and you're unable to get up in the morning and do your everyday functioning, that's a red flag, I would say.
Does anyone else have anything else they want to add here? I appreciate you passing it back, Alicia. Does anybody else have any other things to add about how you could tell if you yourself or possibly a loved one needs some help around their loneliness experiences?
Yeah, it's not a problem until it's a problem. So I would just be looking at, does this keep me from doing anything that's important to me? Does this keep me from engaging fully at work? Does it keep me from engaging in things that I enjoy doing? Does this keep me from connecting with family members? So I think once it interferes with things that are important to you, I think that's a time to really to pay attention and to risk that vulnerability to draw on that inner courage to reach out, and also to pay attention to the folks that you trust. If they're the folks that you trust who are saying, I think this is a concern, and you can trust that from them, then I think that's also something to weigh into all this as well.
Yeah, and I would say, just to speak on people in recovery, absolutely recognizing, like, if you're starting to take actions that are going to jeopardize your recovery, definitely a good time to ask for help, whether that be from your community in recovery or counseling or whatever else. And then sort of unrelated to that, just, obviously if there are any suicidal thoughts, self-harm, things like that, obviously definitely reach out for help at that point if the loneliness does kind of get to that point.
And we also always like to emphasize, you don't need to be in a crisis. I think those are great points, that you could be in a crisis or your loved one could be in a crisis, but you don't necessarily have to be in a crisis or extreme distress. But if you feel like getting help would be beneficial to you, or that you could benefit from having someone to help sort through those emotions, then you don't need to feel like you necessarily need to wait till it becomes some huge crisis or huge challenge. And often addressing challenges or concerns before they grow into some major crisis or major challenge can be very helpful to be able to address them. And so if I or someone I know is feeling very lonely, and I feel like, it's time for me to reach out for help about this, what are some who should they think about reaching out for help, and might be some types of professionals that might be helpful?
Like I stated earlier, if you have an employee assistance program through your job, that might be a good place to start, because you do get a certain amount of free sessions. Psychologytoday.com is a very good resource. You can put your zip code in and it will give you therapists in your area. The good thing about now with the pandemic, a lot of therapists are doing virtual appointments. BetterHelp.com is another resource that you can go to. So now I think therapy is more accessible in the sense that a person that would normally reach out to a therapist may feel more comfortable doing the virtual interaction. So that's a place that you can start.
I would also say people who are members of faith communities to reach out to their clergy person. Often clergy are kind of the first responders to mental health crises in their faith communities, and they can get connected with good resources. So that's another place to get started.
Yep. If you're lucky enough to have health insurance, you can flip over the back of that insurance card and punch in that behavioral health number on there, and find some resources there. And then if you are like the many uninsured folks in Guilford County, you can reach out to your local management entity and talk to someone there, and see where you can go.
And another resource is Family Services of the Piedmont, which has the sliding scale. So for those that may not have health insurance, that is another resource in the Triad area.
Those are all great suggestions, and I especially appreciate sort of the mix of more local here in Greensboro, Guilford County, as well as more kind of national websites and tools where people can search for help. And, definitely there's no shame. We always say this through the Healthy Relationship, no shame in reaching out for help for mental health issues, individual challenges, and especially relationship and couple family types of concerns as well. So we're kind of coming to the end of the program. I haven't seen any questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of move ahead to our final piece here. And I'd like to go through and ask each of you if you could share what is the big takeaway point that you hope that people will leave today's program with. So maybe I'll just go in the order that I see you listed on my screen. So Mike, you're up top on my screen. So we'll start with you.
Yeah, we're just in I'll say unprecedented, difficult, stressful time where anything added onto that is a lot. And if you're going through a lot, or if somebody else sees you're going through a lot, there's definitely take that deep, reach in and grab that courage and reach out. And we're flush with mental health folks in Guilford County and in this area. And even if you're not sure if it's a problem, to talk to somebody and see if it's a problem. So really take that courage, find that courage, and reach out.
Thanks, Mike. Great suggestions. And Robin, how about you? You're next on my screen.
It's okay to feel the way that you're feeling. We've been through a lot. And like Mike said, find that courage within to reach out. There are a lot of resources here in our area. And one other thing, when you think about all that's going on, try to practice gratitude. If you could just think of one thing that you're grateful for. I think about a lot of families have been affected by this pandemic, but gracefully, I think God that my family is okay today. When you just see everything that's going on. So maybe having that practice of gratitude and connecting with someone that can support you through these unprecedented times.
I love that suggestion. I actually just started keeping a gratitude journal myself on Thanksgiving, and I'm hoping I can keep it up. It's a new habit, but I love it. Every day when I go to write my things, I'm like excited. It's made me look for more positives in my day. So I personally can attest to that recommendation. Emily, you're next.
Gosh, there's so many good things. I mean, for me, loneliness is a natural, normal experience, and it doesn't stay forever, that it does go away. And that really challenge yourself when you're experiencing loneliness to let one other person know. Just let one other person know you're feeling lonely, and to kind of at least kind of take a little bit of that courage to see if that will take away some of the edge of the loneliness. And I agree there are just tons of resources here, and I'm grateful to have been a part of this panel to see that too.
Thank you, Emily. I think that's such a wise thought to just start with one other person. You don't have to, build your social network so quickly or tell everybody, but chances are if you tell that one person, they'll probably share back with you that they've had those periods of loneliness as well. And so you can really find some even just starting connections there. Alicia, your next step.
Yes, I love what everyone's been saying throughout this entire panel. There's so much wisdom here. And for me, a huge takeaway is how universal the feeling of loneliness is. And I think that it's probably pretty fair to say that most, if not all of us during the past 12 months have at some point felt some pretty profound and deep loneliness. And that, I really just, like to echo what Brene Brown often says, is that being vulnerable can help us connect with one another, that ability to say me too and to chime in there. So, intentionally connect with a community that shares values and intentions. And that might mean that you have to put it together yourself. And it might mean you need to ask friends and family if they know of communities like that. But this is something we all feel, and we can connect in a greater way if we're willing to put ourselves out there.
Really great final thoughts there, Alicia. And Bernard, how about you to wrap up the panel?
Yeah, so just one thought is just for people who are struggling with addictions, substance use disorders, just recognizing that, loneliness can be definitely the stakes could be a little bit higher, and just approaching, finding ways to deal with that with some tenacity and taking care of it for sure. And just some questions to maybe, reflect on, to what extent is my loneliness affected by my lack of ability to distract myself, and looking at, am I trying to escape or avoid something, can be a really great place to start, I think, in some of the self-reflection that we've been talking about today. And lastly, I'll add just recognizing that loneliness can be an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to connect and build upon the relationships we already have with ourselves and with others. And yeah, that's all my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Bernard, and thanks to all of you for sharing such great thoughts as the takeaway points, as well as throughout the whole program today. I know for me, I just learned a lot from each of you, and just having each of your different perspectives and the different lens that you brought to this conversation gave me a lot of takeaways as I think about kind of how we're all facing periods of loneliness right now. It's such a universal thing. And I know, for me, I've had periods in my life where I've thought, well, gosh, I don't want to admit that I'm feeling lonely, but just to really appreciate that it's something that we all feel, we all experience. We can learn to use our loneliness periods of time to help us learn about ourselves, learn about our needs for connections with others, and sometimes learn about when we might need to reach out for help as well. So thank you all to our panelists. I know that those who have been here with us live today, as well as those who will watch this program later on, will have a lot to take away from hearing from each of you today. So thank you all. Thanks to those who did join us, whether it's for the live program or watching later. For those of us who are joining us live, Camilla shared a link to a feedback survey, which we ask for all of our programs that we do through the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And again, we hope that you'll stay connected with us through the Healthy Relationships Initiative. I think ultimately, our goal through the Healthy Relationships Initiative is to promote happy, healthy, safe relationships, again, of all kinds. And so, it's not just relationships with others, but I think that this loneliness topic really makes us think about our relationship with ourselves as well. And that should be a healthy one as we kind of navigate challenges like loneliness, especially during holidays heightened by the pandemic. So we're grateful that you're here, and we hope that you find some value and some useful tools that you can apply in your life from today's program. So with that, we'll wrap up, but please do stay connected with us. And thanks again to our panel for all of your contributions and for volunteering your time today.